So good evening, everyone. My name is Rachel Tausendfreund. I am responsible for our U.S. and transatlantic work here at the German Council on Foreign Relations. Thank you very much for coming to the German Council, the DGAP, on this lovely fall evening. We are entering the dark period of the year, but according to the speaker tonight, we are not entering a dark period of international relations. So I'm looking forward to a dose of optimism about the global order tonight, which is rarely what we're getting these days. So I have here a copy of the book. This is, I think, the British copy, right? The American copy is nice and yellow. And our speaker today is going to be Amitav Acharya, who is the UNESCO Chair in Transnational Challenges and Governance and the Distinguished Professor at the School of International Service, American University in Washington, D.C. Previously, he was a professor in a couple stations in the UK, as well as Toronto. He is the first non-Western scholar to be elected the president of the International Studies Association, which is the largest global network of in international studies. He's a very prominent IR scholar who's written more books that I'm going to list tonight because that would take all of the introduction time. But most recently, the book he's going to talk about tonight, excuse my note-taking here, The Once and Future World Order, Why Global Civilization Will Survive the Decline of the West. Also, The Making of Global International Relations, Constructing Global Order, and already in 2014, not just 2016, I don't know what happened there, The End of the American World Order. So, and this is, again, a cooperation with our great partners, the Cluster of Excellence Contestations of the Liberal Scripts, as you can see here, who organized this Remaking America event series with us. And this evening is slightly different because it's not remaking America, but remaking the world without America, or at least without American dominance. And so without further ado, Amitav, I'd like to ask you to come up and give a brief lecture, and then we will begin the discussion.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Rachel. And of course, thank you very much, Thomas and Tanya, for getting me here. I am really happy to be able to have a chance to share some of the themes of the book. Because time is short, I'm not going to summarize the book. I can't. I'll show you a few key points so I can register in our minds, including mine, because I sometimes forget what I should emphasize and what I shouldn't in the talk. So I have got a few things to show you. This is generated by AI, by the way. So I said, AI, I think it's maybe Grok. Can you do Once and Future World Order? And that's what Grok did. And actually, I find, I don't know whether you have already done this, that AI actually gives you a lot of creative summaries of your own work. I have compared my work with Kissinger's work and asked them to illustrate it, and all kinds of stuff comes through. But we'll talk about it. You can see the China, Africa, a dragon somewhere. Okay, so this is a very historical book. I should warn you, because I know this audience and this particular topic may sound all about Trump and what happens next. But when I wrote this book, started writing it, Trump was not even in the horizon as politician. And we had Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton, Secretary of State. That's how when I started working on it. And I tried not to dwell too much on Trump. But because this is a commercial book, the publisher who actually supported this book, especially, I didn't have any other grant, so I basically relied for buying maps and doing proofreading and all. They also wanted to, I also wanted a book that reaches beyond the academic audience. So we therefore wanted to put a large, big chapter in the end. If I had the choice, I would have stopped in the 19th century. But keep that in mind. It is 5,000 years of history covering all civilizations and regions, and not necessarily about current affairs and public policy, but I'll show you a couple of examples in the end, how it has been used as in policy debates, including an article in Foreign Affairs, an article in New York Times, where they pick up some of the historical narratives to make a point about the contemporary policy issues. Okay, and I'm not saying the past is going to reappear, but the history doesn't repeat itself. That's my belief. But history has possibilities. It shows different ways of organizing world order that we therefore should not take the present for granted as what you call presentism as going to endure forever. So history is the way you go and look at what are the possibilities. Is multipolarity really bad? Is a nation state really permanent? Is empire really gone? So how do you build a world order that is not based on the Westphalian model or without the balance of power? It's free trade invented in the West or in the East. So that kind of knowledge and looking at the origins of concepts, both from the West and the rest, is what this book is about. This is not a book about how the rest met the West, just Quinn's book, how the West and the rest met each other. And that is the theme. Okay. So this is the basic argument. Probably the key argument is that world order is not a monopoly of any civilization, of any nation or region. It's a shared creation, and shared it's a nice sounding word, but it actually means something to me. It's either through independent innovation or creation of same or similar institutions in many parts of the world in their foundational forms, not in the most recent forms, or through diffusion. So it's both, and it's not all about diffusion. That's another fetish that people talk about. Some civilizations like the Americas, Native Americans developed very similar institutions as in, say, in Eurasia without having any known contact with each other. So shared creation, that means that. And the foundational ideas and mechanisms of world order, I just give few examples here: independence of states, diplomacy, peace treaties, economic interdependence, humanitarian values, racial and religious tolerance, and much more. So again, very broad ideas in their foundational form came from multiple places and not just from the West. And finally, the last, maybe the most controversial point is that the decline of Western dominance is not a bad thing. It's actually good. And here, remember, it's decline of Western dominance, not the decline of the West, not the decline of Western civilization. It's the dominant role of the West. And it could actually create a variety of ideas and pathways for order. Okay, this is my second last slide. These are some of the examples I'm talking through the book: independent state system, great power cooperation, just war principles, right to life and property, decentralized empire, and through diffusion, competitive public service, long distance trade, a rational mode of thinking, and interstate confederation. So some of them are independently created in multiple places, some of them direct diffusion. You might find that the Chinese competitive public service exam coming to Europe and the United States is one of the most striking, maybe China's biggest contribution to world order, not gunpowder or compass. So again, I'm teasing you. So buy the book and read it. And I rewrote this book for another year to make it easily digestible to a broad audience. So I'm just teasing you. This is all there. A lot more. Okay, so I will move now to one example, just one example. There are many. So the first known peace treaty, non-aggression, peacemaking, collective defense, the Egyptian-Hittite peace treaty, 1259 BC. Look at the language of non-aggression between Egypt and Hatti, the two superpowers of the ancient Near East, between, say, about 2000 BC and 1200 BC. So That treaty is available still. You can see it in the Istanbul Museum, in Egypt also, the Mausoleum of Ramses the Great. And they're exactly the same language. Nobody is saying the Egyptian text is different from the Hittite text. And they also talk about extradition, how if a rebel against Egypt escapes to Hatti, Hatti will basically send him back to Egypt, extradition. And there's collective defense and some of the basic principles. Now, you can also talk about Geneva Conventions and how to protect civilians in war, not to attack a soldier that dismounted who was wounded, who is sick, and very similar to Geneva Convention principles, which weapons are broken. I also talk about freedom of the seas. Maybe we give a lot of credit to Hugo Grotius, but actually Hugo Grotius supported the Dutch East India Company. He was on the payroll of the Dutch East India Company because the Dutch attacked a Portuguese ship, and Portuguese were not letting the Dutch to trade in the Indian Ocean. The Dutch hired Grotius. The captain of the ship that attacked the Portuguese ship was actually his cousin, Grotius's cousin. He wrote a treaty, he wrote a book about why the Dutch have the right to trade in the Indian Ocean. The first chapter became Mare Liberum. The same Dutch went establishing a far bigger monopoly over the Indian Ocean than the Portuguese ever did. And they destroyed native trading system. Whereas in the Indian Ocean, traditionally, there had never been any conception of controlling the sea. God made land and the sea. The land he divided among men, and the sea he gave in common. All right. So why are we talking about all this? Now, you can say these are all old stuff. What's the relevance of bringing history? We have freedom of the seas today. Is it the same as we have in the past? So why do we go back so much in history? What's this diplomacy and peace treaty? These are like primitive documents. So what's the relevance of that today? So I give you this methodological approach of mine is that, Robert Dahl, the political scientist at Yale, lay political scientist, he said that if you deny Athens credit for inventing democracy, because Athenian democracy was not what democracy looked like, that's not fair. So it's just like saying the Wright brothers did not invent the airplane because the modern airplane with the Lufthansa or Singapore Airlines is so different from what the Wright flyer. So if you do that, and I give full credit to Athens, in the fact that they didn't have individual liberty. The liberty of Athens was liberty of the polis, not liberty of the individual. Voting rights are limited. We give them credit. Why don't we give credit to inventions in Islam, China, India, pre-Columbian Americas of rudimentary, maybe in some cases actually far more developed. I think the laws of war, just war in ancient India was far more advanced than Geneva Conventions in many ways and was actually implemented. But even if they are foundational, if we accept Athens invented democracy, fair enough, why don't we also say other civilizations did something in a foundational form? Okay, so enough about history. What about the future? So my argument is very simple, that first of all, the decline of Western dominance is inevitable and not necessarily a bad thing. And why is not a bad thing? Not because the world is going to become a paradise. There has never been a world order that is perfectly peaceful. The liberal order that we talk about may have been very good for the West, but it was not really all that good for many parts of the so-called global South. So I think what we are seeing now is a transition, maybe after 300 years, towards a more level playing field. And that can lead to conflict. No world order is perfectly peaceful, but there are also ways of creating peace that can be influenced. We can learn from the past. And in the last chapter of the book, I talk about this, the idea of a multiplex world as opposed to a multipolar world, multipolarity being, about very power-centric, material power, distribution of power. Multiplex talks about distribution of ideas and norms as well as power, but also brings in non-great powers like middle powers, regional actors, institutions, non-state actors, how that is actually going to be the future. And it will be multi-civilizational, no hegemony of a single power. So if you want to see one example, that's what it looks like. Messy, but what life is messy. All right. And I just missed this. One of the reasons I wrote this book, because the best-selling book today on world order is by Henry Kissinger. And when I started teaching 2014, I had this book. I went to Kissinger's book launch. I have 2 copies signed by Mr. Kissinger. Hopefully he'll give me some money later. It starts with Europe, Westphalia, concert, first 2 chapters. Third, Islam, world in disorder. Then India, little section here, China, little section here, then United States, savior of the world or acting for all mankind. Now, this is the classic kind of Eurocentric, Western-centric discourse that many of us, including myself, grew up with. I actually honestly believed all this stuff. I still use Kissinger because I think it's a good text to tell people what Western centrism is about. But I want to write a book, which is this, which is what we have here, where actually we start from the Sumerians and Egyptians, go through the civilizations to the return of the rest, and covers Europe and the United States. Okay, so 15 minutes. So I will stop here. I hope Thomas will ask me some questions about the challenges I faced in writing this book, the pushback from both my ill wishers and well wishers, including my editors and publishers, and how I should not write this book, and be very happy to talk also more about policy, specific policy examples, including, if you want, the role of Europe.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. We're going to talk a lot. No, you can go ahead and sit in the middle. You don't. We will talk, I'm sure, a lot more about the global multiplex and what we all have to look forward to in the more optimistic vision. Thomas, Risse, will you please also join us on the stage? As our discussant tonight, we have one of our Scripps partners. Thomas is very much actually the co-creator of this series with me, now a retired senior professor with Scripps, the Cluster of Excellence, and also from the FU. So he has even more time to join us here at the DGAP for all kinds of interesting events. We're going to have a brief conversation, the 3 of us, and then we'll open it up also to audience questions.
Very briefly. Number 1, I share 100% Amitav's conclusions. I share roughly 80% of the analysis, but the framing, and you could see it on the slides, I would put a little bit different. Let me explain. So I agree with Amitav that what we're currently seeing is, I wouldn't call it the decline of the West. The decline story makes no sense to me. But we do have a clear retreat of the US from the liberal international order. And let's face it, that is permanent. It has nothing to do, or it has a little bit to do with Trump, but whoever follows will be on the same thing. So, period. And I agree with him, that ain't a bad thing. Okay, not necessarily. There's all kinds of bad concerned with this. Maybe at that point I'm a bit of a different opinion, but I think we can manage. And the most important thing is this kind of optimistic point that Amitav makes. The retreat of the US is not the end of the world as we know it. Okay. There are other states, other powers, etc. in the world. We can talk about this multiplex. I have questions on that multiplex world, but I'm not in this first round. Where I'm a little bit more critical is, and I like that I very much like the analysis going way back in history. And then even if you look, and I'm not a historian, so I don't know what I'm talking about here. But even if you look at the last 60s or the post World War II international order, it's just a myth that A, the West was dominant, and B, it's all the doing of the US. That's a mythology. It's historically false. It has always been false, etc. And Amitav and other scholars are showing it now. For example, if you want to learn something about the international economic order, read various books by Eric Helleiner. He started with Bretton Woods, and he shows that the story is. I'm not saying that the West or the US was irrelevant. That of course would be nonsense. But there's much more to the story of the current world order than just this. And this is my little criticism of your book. It still falls into the trap of West and the rest, or West and non-West, etc. And I think what the book in fact shows empirically, and here he is together with a whole range of historians from global history historians and others who are writing this now, is that the binary West non-West makes absolutely no sense. It's a history of entanglements, and he shows it in his book. These entanglements, and sometimes it's diffusion, sometimes it's not diffusion. I'm completely with you on that point. Goes back thousands and thousands of years of history. Okay, and but we need to understand this. And now I jump forward. I wouldn't talk about Western decline. This is again, for me, it makes little sense to talk about decline. Yes, the relative strength in terms of economic power has a little bit declined over the years, but I mean, look, I mean, the US is still good for 20% of the world GDP. Europe is good for 20%, and China is also good for 20%. Sorry, these are formidable. If all that counts as economic or military power, there is no real. I mean, yes, the others have become stronger, but I think in the current world, and there I'm with you on that multiplex thing. These types of raw power don't really give you any leverage. I mean, if we talk about military power, the US is still the dominant military power, period. And China needs decades to get there. All right? Does it buy the US enormous leverage? Does it translate one-to-one into influence in world politics? I doubt that. So at that point, I'm completely with him. But the decline part is really not the point. So if Amitav is correct, then this has enormous repercussions for the world we currently live in. Because in my view, it's not the end of the liberal international order as we know it. Exhibit number 1, Trump engages in a weird trade war, not with everybody. He just caved in to the Chinese last week. Okay, so the Chinese won. You could the photo, Xi Jinping versus this was, I thought was hilarious. But the point being, we have that trade war. Do we have a rush into protectionism worldwide at the moment? No, we have not. In fact, most states in the world are doing all kinds of regional trade agreements, trying to figure out how they can work their supply chains around this. German companies are starting to think twice whether continue investing in the US, given the uncertainties there, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not saying this is difficult and complicated, but it's not simply that therefore a free trade order is gone. The US has left various international agreements, including climate change and others. Does that mean all these agreements are dead? No, it doesn't mean that. It might be a little bit more difficult, but I'm stop here. I'm supposed to stop here.
Just for the first round.
First round. So I come full circle. If it is true that the current world order has many more stakeholders than just the West, and if this binary does not make sense, there is a story of hope in there. Because then, may the defenders of the liberal international orders please stand up. And they're not just in Europe. They're all over the world. Yeah. And I mean, we can discuss this later on, whether your multiplex world order is actually, to what extent that is compatible with the liberal international order. I think it is, but I want to hear your point on this.
Yes, I'd like to hear your response to to Thomas's question whether there is a decline in the West. But that's exactly the question I was going to ask. What is the relationship between global multiplex and what we call the liberal international world order? So exactly on this point that Thomas raised, here's your mic. I'd like to hear you elaborate just a little bit about what the difference is or what the similarities are.
So my first observation is that Thomas and I agree. Thomas agrees with me a lot more than he lets it. So I think I apologize for the fact that this is a big book and it's very hard to get all the things out. But there is something about vocabulary that I want to highlight. The reason I use West versus the rest, because those are the signature things that we have out there. But in the very first chapter, I clarify what I mean by this West versus the rest. And these are terms of convenience to get the debate started. Unless you want to start with multiplex, and people will think you are not really relating to what's actually happening at a time when there is so much talk about the global South. So my last paragraph of the book says we should get rid of both the West and the rest. But there is one difference. We should get rid of the West first. Because the West came first and the rest came as a protest. But I think both are dysfunctional, both have contributed to a lot of conflict. It's a form of conflict. I mean, many of you may not know this. When Sam Huntington wrote about class of civilization, he said this is really a West versus the rest thing. And in his book and in his Foreign Affairs article. And this has always been one of the things I'm trying to argue against. There was no West before, no rest before. These are all 20th century, maybe even Cold War constructs and time to go. So on that one, we do agree. But I think I am just trying to say that I never accepted them except as terms of convenience. And you're quite right. I look throughout the book, you look at the circulation of ideas and sometimes diffusion, but sometimes parallel, independent innovation. Why? Because human society, human beings sometimes come up with similar solutions to similar problems of anarchy, problems of balancing. And you will find that the Inca Empire managed its empire in very similar ways that the Mongol state, and they had no relationship with each other. Then on the question of decline of the West, and I am very careful that I say decline of Western dominance, not decline of the West. I was the very first author, again, you can ask AI, who wrote End of American World Order. And that on the back of the book, 2014, but it was actually done in 2013, said the liberal order is, I say, ended. But you know, when people think about end of this, end of that, end of work, end of America, we don't really think it's ending. We just want to dramatize it. But I think I've always said the liberal order will remain as one of the elements. It's not the only hegemonic order, so like liberal hegemony that John Eichenberg talks about. The liberal order is a liberal hegemonic order. He uses that interchangeably. So I don't think that will disappear. But that will be one of the orders that have to compete and coexist with other types of orders. But here also, you have to keep in mind that the idea of a liberal, why is it not something I use very much? And this is an argument, and maybe John will tell you this. I said, John, when you write a book that says the liberal order was created in multiple places in the world, and not just in Europe. It was also created in Asia, created in Africa. I will be the first one to cheer you. But if you say that this was a European Western invention, everybody should accept it, that's not I'm going to accept it. Because my book shows, as I showed you some example, ideas of freedom of the seas, ideas of diplomacy and peace treaties, the many humanitarian values. These are what you consider as part of the liberal order. They also came from many parts of the world.
But these are liberal ideas.
Yeah, but liberal means what? Whose term is liberal? That's why I'm talking about liberal is not a term that other people accept. So you can find another term. A lot of us are prisoners of vocabulary. That we use the same term, like multipolarity. It's also not something, the Chinese or the Indians have that. So one of the problems we have in IR is that some of the core ideas and concepts etymologically come from Latin or Greek, and they transmitted through medieval English, vulgar English, medieval French, and we think because the terms are have the roots, they are actually invented there. So I think there is a point here about making concepts more in terms of their etymological meaning, more universal. And if you say that has the liberal order, why would you call it liberal? I can call it something else from Chinese, from Sanskrit. So because the liberal order has a baggage, right? And I can go more into it, what is the legacy of some of the main creator. I mean, I gave you the example of Hugo Grotius. I mean, with due respect, the guy was defending Dutch imperialism. And his brother, his cousin, sank a Portuguese ship. So it's piracy plus imperialism and created even a bigger monopoly. That doesn't mean we should disregard it. But why would that person be called liberal? It actually gives liberal a bad name. If you actually have when I was writing my previous book, you said people like Jawaharlal Nehru are liberal. I agree with that. So the idea of we need to unpack liberalism and not make it like a Western invention. Then I think there is liberal and multiplex are almost very, very similar. There's significant overlap between this. But if you say that all these things came from, there is a big L, liberal, and of course we know the history of liberalism. No book has been written that I know of that says liberalism came from multiple civilizations. So we think it has become Western-centric. Okay, so that's pretty much, finally, the idea of the United States and the good decline of Western dominance. I, again, do not say decline of Western civilization, decline of the West as an entity, although it would be, but dominance of the West, that the West creates everything. West is necessary to maintain world order. Now, that decline opens up space for a lot of others, but the values and principles doesn't have to change. So what are we going to do in the next few years is, at least 3.5 years, we're going to have something I call world -1. The United States basically, either because of ideology and Trump's personal antics, withdraws or pursues a very different foreign policy agenda. But I don't think the United States will do that permanently. It will come back. It will come back, but we'll have a world -1. And there is a history of the world being run without the United States. There are many institutions with the law of the sea, there is the International Criminal Court, and many other unilateral attack on Iraq that the world has not, the United States has often been an absentee, absent of the creation in some of these ways. I think for the next 3.5 years, maybe unless he goes for a third term, I think the world -1 can work. So we had the unipolar moment. We have moved from the unipolar moment to world -1 moment. Okay.
So thank you. I'll let you also jump back in, Thomas. But I mean, to get to this point, there's a version of, I mean, you're kind of arguing in the book against a version that very much, it's a common version of history that I think people learn in the West, which is sort of all of these ideas that were created in the West, democracy and freedom and property rights and all of the stuff, which you're arguing against. But there's another version that I feel like is the version I learned in school, which was this kind of history of Western civilization that starts in ancient Egypt. Like we just sort of picked the civilization that we decided is the origin of Western civilization, right? And then there's a kind of linear progression. And China's mentioned. I'm sure India wasn't mentioned at all. But there is this idea that these different civilizations through history fed into a kind of linear progression toward a more inclusive, more democratic, more just kind of society, with all of the imperfections and omissions of history that entails. And so my question to you is, if we continue with that linear version, then we have the decline of Western dominance over the current system, which will be then in this lovely linear story, followed by, and you say it in your book, a kind of more inclusive global order, because it will be less dominated by the West. But isn't it sort of equally possible, not to bring pessimism into it, but that the story isn't so linear, right? And that you have times of greater cooperation, more just relationships between powers, and then times where it's more disorderly and more chaotic. So I wanted to ask you to sort of talk about that. If it's by necessity, whatever comes next is going to build on the achievements of what we have now, or if it's equally possible that we might have a more disordered order coming up. And then I don't know if we want to have Thomas add a thought before we go back to you.
I don't care. So
No, you're
just all right. So on that linearity, I think that is an ex post reconstruction of a history that gets rid of all the contradictions that happened. And by the way, also by simple coincidences, chances, etc., etc. Yeah, this is sort of a social construction of history that has very little to do with at least what the people who lived through this were experiencing at the time. I don't think they were experiencing any kind of linearity. Yeah, and maybe in 30 years, some other people will construct that kind of linearity. I wanted to get back on that liberal, okay, because that I think is an important one, and also since this is our co-organized by our cluster of excellence. The point being, yes, liberal has a lot of contradiction. There are all kinds of internal problems, and you mentioned that. A lot of the 19th century British liberals were also colonialists, which means for some of the people today in the post-colonial world, liberalism and colonialism go together, and they're intrinsically linked. But even in post-colonial studies, you have a total other group that says, no, it's not linked. We can use liberal ideas to fight exactly these imperial arguments, etc. And here we have family resemblances. So if we had it with the freedom of the seas, if we have the idea that there are some sort of that human dignity is universal, and out of this comes certain inalienable rights. You can call it however you want, but there's a family resemblance to liberal ideas. Or that a collective as a people have the right to determine their fates themselves. We call it collective self-determination. You can call it how you want, but it has the family resemblance of being liberal. So a lot of these arguments, even from people distancing themselves, no, I'm not a liberal, no, I'm not a liberal, in the end have a family resemblance. And the problem is, let me put this way, a lot of so-called Western ideas have never been the propriety of Western ideas. That was the point I was making. If we think about world history for the last, since we had written history, it's always a history of entanglements. Yeah, think about the Silk Road. The Silk Road was not something that was just about trade. It was also about ideas going back and forth. Helleiner makes the point in a book that the ideas about free trade, it's hard to say where that actually originated. Adam Smith was in contact with Chinese philosophers at the time. And it's very hard, and by the way, it doesn't matter for me, who first came up with the idea that actually free trade is good for wealth. Yeah, but this idea, these intellectuals at the time, and this is 19th century now, it's fairly recent in world history terms, yeah, they were thinking together. Yeah, and we would argue at the cluster, these were liberal ideas. Yeah, now for some political purposes, and one has to talk about. There's one is the so-called Western hypocrisy on all of that issue, and we know that double talk, double standards, and we can go on and on and on. But I have to say, if I hear Xi Jinping talking about universal values and at the same time oppressing half of his people, or Putin claiming, Putin is the best with this. Putin claiming all kinds of civilizational values and human dignity, etc., etc. I'm a little bit, hey, folks, be careful. Or Modi is another one of my heroes, in that context. So I'm saying hypocrisy is not or it's not only Western leaders who are hypocrites every once in a while. Okay.
Yeah, if you could address that. I mean, in a way, there's an overlap between where Thomas stopped and where I stopped in terms of with the leaders in power now.
So among the list of hypocrites, you can add Trump and J.D. Vance because they are doing the same thing, and Erdogan. I mean, in my survey of history, I have always found that there is no all civilizations are eclectic. They all have attraction or ugliness. There's no pure, peaceful, or purely hostile. Like Xi Jinping says, he has a peace gene, a Chinese. That's not true. But Modi, all same thing. But the President Trump now wants to intervene in Nigeria because they're killing Christians. Look, we're come in a moment where civilization is being abused. Civilization can be good if you use it for opening up and building peace and negotiations. Civilization is very damaging, destructive when you use it for regime legitimacy, as we find that. So I call them civilizational regimes, and Trump and J.D. Vance are good examples of that now. But in terms of going back a little, I don't believe in linearity. I don't believe in cyclical history. That's two of the things that I discard. The one thing I'm taking some liberties with what they call tempocentrism, backward projecting of modern ideas. You can say that, hey, we are talking about human rights, democracy, freedom of speech. Such concepts are so new. Why are you trying to find the roots from the past? And there will be people who disagree with that. And I acknowledge, but I think it is also what you call family history and foundational ideas. They're not exactly, democracy and human rights is really a 19th, 20th century in terms of practice. But we go back to ancient Greece and trace it, even though how it was imperfect. So imperfect origins are the origins of most of the ideas we have. But we should give credit to these foundational ideas in multiple civilizations. But there is no linearity. I mean, there is so many examples of non-linearity. In India, you have the Golden Age and the Dark Age, Christianity, and then we go back. And it's not cyclical in the sense of history repeating itself. So I have basically got rid of, in my thinking, idea of linearity or cyclical history. How do we? Yeah, I know you are sensitive about liberalism, but good news is your project has been renewed, right, for 7 years. Don't have to worry about it. So anything I say about liberalism is not going to affect it. But I think it will be really good to say, why would you use certain terms, including the West, including Global South, including liberalism, when these terms are so contested? And also, as I said, we can write a history of liberalism, and we'll say, okay, the liberal ideas came from multiple places. Then I would accept it. So there is the classical liberalism and there is the multiplex liberalism. I would like to redefine this concept, and I'm all for it, because with a dose of, actually, you shouldn't totally dismiss realists. They are actually also have a lot of good things to contribute, but on a constructivist. But I think multiplex idea is compatible with the liberalism. But I just think you have to see what are the references, points of reference, what are you citing, and if we say this all came from a certain set of ideas. I mean, Immanuel Kant is a classic example. So Kant was anti-colonial in many ways, but he also was a racist in terms of classifying human civilization to different grades. So every civilization is eclectic. They have ugliness and attraction. Same in China, you have the legalists, very ruthless, anti-people, but then the Confucians who are actually more benign. In India, you have the same Maurya dynasty, King Ashoka renouncing war, and Kautilya basically saying, kill everybody and build the empire. I find that every civilization has this duality or what eclectic tendencies. So liberalism, in that sense, has somehow been stylized in a particular way, the way the literature has made it look like. So maybe unpacking it will be a good exercise. Then you can actually develop. I am actually asking for a set of new terms, a new vocabulary. Like multipolar, to me, too narrow, too power-centric, only talks about great powers. Multiplex, it's much more kind of a complex, and it captures the complexity we actually have in the world. All right.
Yeah, okay. So, I mean, this actually, I'm going to direct this question to both of you, because you were both in your own ways optimistic about a post-American order, right? I mean, you wrote the op-ed in the New York Times that the New York Times gave that title to, and it's there's printouts available outside. And the title is Reasons to be Optimistic About a Post-American Order. And this is why I brought up the idea of linearity, because if we think whatever follows the American-dominated order is going to be an improvement on a kind of continuation of, I don't know, a more just development of order, then you would be automatically optimistic. But if one doesn't believe in linearity, then my question is, what are exactly the reasons to be optimistic about a post-American order? And Thomas, you also are relatively optimistic, right? You said,
relatively.
Yeah. We can see people building other coalitions to support the values. So I wanted to sort of direct that question to both of you. What are the reasons to be optimistic about a post-American order, looking at it from today? And I am encouraging you to give us these optimistic reasons. By the way, it sounds like I'm critical, but I'm looking for them.
So, Thomas?
Okay. A step back. I'm an analyst, first of all. And whether I'm an optimist or pessimist is, in a way, irrelevant. What I'm saying, though, is in a climate that we currently have, where you have a lot of these doomsday analysts running around I mean, read Foreign Affairs, read whatever you want, you know, where it's all doomsday, the sky is falling, etc. I'm pointing out to some tendencies that might lead in a direction where I think Amitav and we are completely in agreement that a reformed liberal international order needs to be more inclusive. There's all kinds of things. I can start with the UN Security Council if you want. Yeah. So there's all kinds of things that need to be done in order to make that order more inclusive, more fair, more just. The whole global justice discussion, we have it now at the COP conference on climate change. It's coming up there. So I'm saying there are some tendencies, and also we can observe it already, that there are still some people who defend an international order that is rules-based, where international law actually matters against all the doomsday sayers, people who defend a free and open trade order. I just mentioned that point in the statement before. And even in one of the most contested areas, i.e. human rights, which is one of the most contested areas because you have a whole bunch of autocracies who don't want at least the political human rights. So we have a lot of contestations there, but even there you have defenders. It's not that everybody is giving up and folding up. That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying, and I don't even attach likelihoods. Yeah, we can think about scenarios, but I'm careful. In 1989, I was totally wrong with my predictions. Okay, so, and I learned from that, you know, so I'm not predicting anything.
If that was the last time you were wrong, I think you're doing pretty well.
I'm sorry?
If that was the last time you were wrong, then you're doing pretty well.
No, come. I thought Trump never gets elected in the first place. Come on. So there are all kinds of issues where I was totally wrong.
So Amitav, what about you? What are the
So I
reasons you're seeing?
I never predict. I anticipate. The difference between predicting and anticipating. If you have a sense of the drivers, you can make anticipation. So in 2014, in my book, I did say that whether the United States is declining or not, that's jury is out. The liberal international order it built is in decline. Ended. So there's a difference between the decline of America as a power and decline of the order that it builds. And here I say something similar, that even though the world order, you said doomsday, there's not too much doomsday going on. But you should all know this, because bad news sells. I mean, that's what, when you have an algorithm in Google, all the bad news comes first. And or if you traditional newspapers, how many times you have a frontline news say that, oh, Nigeria becomes self-sufficient in food, or even China abolished poverty. I mean, you don't hear that because that's how the media thinks, which is why I have not watched television news for 3 years now. So that's probably why I'm optimistic. Okay. But I think you should remember, it's very clear that where is this optimism focused on? So in my book, in the last chapter, I do some survey of opinion surveys. The people in China, India are not pessimistic. The people in the capital cities of the West, Washington, Berlin, London, my God, they are really pessimistic. And Paris, they are pessimistic because they have more to lose. Whereas countries like China, India, Indonesia, which I also travel quite a lot, they think whatever they had, this is better. So compared to 50 years ago, they might think, okay, they're going to get 20% tariffs or 50% tariffs, but they just think this is still better than 100 years ago when they were under colonial rule. So optimism and pessimism is very relative, context dependent. And just because we have the big newspapers and channels telling us, we should not buy it. And And also, my sense of optimism is not about the world become a more peaceful place. I mean, the Wall Street Journal did a vicious attack on my book. I invite you to read it, because that I would have been surprised if they didn't like my book, because it's against all the ideology of and they did it with a columnist of their own and American Enterprise Institute. So the New York Times did a very good review, on the other hand, because they thought, and even Foreign Affairs, John actually did a very good review of the book, I think, pointing out the difference between this book and some other traditional texts. My point is that the idea of optimism, the extent of my optimism is twofold. One is, as Thomas already said, just because the American-led order is declining doesn't mean world order is disappearing. The people conflate those two things. The decline of the U.S. dominance means the collapse of world order generally. World order is bigger than X or Y creating it. And the second thing is that being inclusive is not a bad thing. It's not being stable or peaceful. Like no world order in history has been peaceful. It has been peaceful for some, peaceful, harmful for others. And the liberal order, past 40 years, 98% of the conflicts happen in the global south, and none happen in Europe. And that's not necessarily cause for it's an optimism or pessimism. It depends on where you are. And I believe that in the coming world, the multiplex world, will order and peace and justice will be regionalized. Some regions will be more peaceful and stable, others will not be. And we know that. I mean, you can always say everything you get, every time you bring an example, people think, oh no, ASEAN is falling apart. But ASEAN is not falling apart. Southeast Asia is actually far more stable than, say, Middle East, or Northeast Asia, or South Asia. And I think you will find relative stability is not globalized, but regionalized. And this is a finding that might go back to several of my previous writings, that there will be some security communities, there will be some localized anarchies that are localized but don't spread, and there will be some enduring rivalries. So we have to think in terms of nuances rather than say the whole world is falling apart. And that is a self-fulfilling prophecy, by the way. So one of my first policy recommendations, that don't get into a self-fulfilling prophecy. The world is going to collapse, and it will collapse, because there's nothing you can do about it.
So, by the way, now we will also open for questions. So I think Thomas wanted to say something, but I will be scanning the audience to see if anybody wants to join the conversation. So I will, I have one here already, so I'll go to that and then I can follow up. Or was that two? Okay, two questions already. Good.
Thank you very much. I wanted to hear your thoughts on thought I would like to formulate now, that maybe a reason for optimism would also be a position you could take, that actually the at least values and ideas formerly promoted by the West through the liberal order actually succeeded, because the liberal idea, as I know it, always promoted wealth through free trade and peace through more equal rights between the states also. So that the US and West are in relative decline should only prove that this thought actually succeeded. What would we expect from the world order if we organize it a way that promotes more equality than for the more stable, more strong nations to be in relative decline?
Excellent question. I think we'll collect the second question and then get discussions on it.
Yeah, Oliver Quitz, my name. So I share your view of optimism when you look from a total world perspective. Obviously, the growth of wealth took overproportionally place in the world outside the West. But help me to pick me up with some optimism here, because obviously we have a Western or European-centric view here. And what I'm observing here at the moment is a huge risk of decline of our lovely liberal, free, democratic values under threat from so many angles, and a very weak state of Europe that in the short term is going to lose its protection from the United States, exposed to powers that I wouldn't call necessarily friendly. So I don't think it takes much imagination to see that we are into difficult times. And to be quite honest, it's nice if over proportional wealth growth goes on in Indonesia and Thailand and so forth. But I'm also very much worried about my own position here. And here I'm not finding so much reason for optimism at this specific moment in time. So if you can provide some ideas in that respect, that would be greatly appreciated.
Excellent. So first, the question of are the fact that countries like China, but also India, Indonesia, saw so much development in the old system exactly the strongest points of evidence that they will support or bolster the system moving forward? First question. Second question, what about from a Western European perspective? Are there still reasons to be optimistic? I'm going to start with you, Amitav. You can take either or both, and then Thomas.
So let me start with what you just said, that China and India have could have become major stakeholders. I mean, again, when this issue came up in 2010s, and people and some of our great liberal scholar friends said, because China and India have benefited so much from the liberal order, they will defend it. And I said in my 2014 book, no, that's not how the world works. And why is because that's sort of a structural view, and we're getting back to structure agency debate here, that order created possibilities, but what about the agents? Now, let me give an example. I mentioned this in my book. Singapore and Philippines, the two allies of the United States. Singapore was authoritarian, and Philippines at one point was very democratic. Singapore did so much better than Philippines. Although Philippines was an American ally, Singapore was actually technically an ally. Why? Because the regime, you may not like Lee Kuan Yew, but the regime actually has agency. Why wasn't China before Deng Xiaoping not doing well? Why isn't India before Narasimha Rao taking off? So I think you have to give some credit to the regimes in power, whether they're democratic or authoritarian or a bit of both. So that's why a structural explanation that liberal order created the opportunity generally did. But I think what regimes did with it is in fact important, so, and that's where the agency matter. And if you give that credit, I would think fine. I mean, then liberal order did create a lot of opportunity, but it also created a lot of poverty. I mean, East Asia benefited, Africa did not. Latin America also did not. Europe was stable, but Middle East wasn't. So it depends on what. So you have to give some blame or agency to the governments of the region. And the first question about liberal idea succeeded. I answered that question. The U.S. You talk about the decline of values and decline of say universal values. You know, sadly, this is more common, most evident in the West, because you never expected China to become liberal democracy, but you certainly did not expect the Vice President of the United States coming to Europe and saying, "Hey, you are losing your values." You know, I mean, look at this: the values of secularism, tolerance, and for better or for worse, the EU upheld these values. And here is a regime coming to tell the Europeans that you have lost it. because you're giving too much freedom to, you are being too politically correct. So this is a new development since World War II. Maybe before World War II, you had something else. So the West, if we can still use the term as convenience, but the Europeans in particular have a lot more to do to stand up against this. You would need to see populism. Now, there was populism. Populism in the global South is nothing new. But this kind of virulent populism is seen in Europe and the United States in particular is a new development. Okay.
Thomas.
Okay, 2 quick points. First on you, yes. The answer is yes. And a lot of, but again, the origins of a lot of stuff that then succeeded in the West is not coming from the West. So we need to really think about these entanglements. But we are now in a globally, this is this image, this very complicated image of that multiplex world. This is exactly the point. So I give you an example. It's actually in the book, movies. So Hollywood has diffused globally. And now, what is it? Bollywood or this Nigerian thing have overtaken Hollywood.
Korean,
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. So, yeah. So in that sense, it's succeeded. By the way, the late Joe Nye wrote a book about this. In the first version came out in 1989. It was called Bound to Lead and was about soft power. That is something we haven't talked about at all. Yeah, there is more to power as influence than just military and economic power. Difficult times, yes, absolutely. Otherwise, we wouldn't be sitting here. Okay. However, remind you, liberal ideas, liberal societies, etc. There's always been contestation. There's always been conflict. And in fact, a lot of liberal societies are thriving because they were able to deal with these contestations in a productive way. Tanja Börzel, who is sitting here, has just published the working paper, the paper that you presented last week, where she shows that it is one thing that I start talking about the threat to liberal societies from inside liberal society, mostly radical populist right-wing parties. Okay, the only country in Europe that seriously backslided and where the democratic institutions got really dismantled is Hungary. The only one. Do we have contestations everywhere? Yes, of course. Can I predict what happens in the next German elections? No. But it tells you, by for example, the Dutch example from last week just shows that even if such a party gets, up to 30% of the votes, that's not necessarily the end of the world as we know it. Yeah, but it depends. I mean, he was talking about agency. It depends on the fact that the defenders of liberal democracies please stand up. Yeah, we have it in our hands to do something about this. So I'm with you. We're in difficult times. Or take the Russian aggression against Ukraine. Okay, I think there was a collective wake-up call in Europe, and now it's going to take some time, and you can't build up your security from one day to the next. I mean, we have all these discussions in Germany, but also in other countries right now. But my sense is we are starting to get serious about our own defense and military security. And there is the realization among European elites that we cannot simply outsource on our security any longer to the US. And therefore, we need to talk about the alternatives in what we do. And so far, the solidarity with Ukraine hasn't changed much. So again, yes, it's extremely difficult. Yeah. Yes, our economies are not doing that well, and we can discuss endlessly why this is the case. But I think there is a certain a spirit at the moment that you can see where people think, okay, we need to, particularly security and defense-wise, we need to take our fate in our own hands, yeah, and can't just outsource this. So even in these difficult times, there are some arguments in favor of some more optimistic view.
It's at least not lost yet.
Not lost yet.
So we have lots of questions. Oh my gosh. Okay. We have 1, 2, they're right next to each other. And then in the back row there, I'm going to collect all 3 in this section. And then we'll see. I might have to do another round. So I see you.
Thank you. Yasmin Soysal, I'm also from Scripts. Could you tell us a bit more how this multiplex world will work? I mean, I want to see the slide. It's gone now, but it looked very complex. How will it work, and what is it? If you could tell us. I mean, we're going to buy the book and read, but if you could tell us a bit now. I mean, it's yeah. And secondly, this is a question to both of you, Thomas and you. So why is it important to know that, yes, Athens was a democracy? Why is it important that human rights was not only a Western thing? Is it because by giving ownership, it will make it more likely that people, different communities, different contexts will commit themselves? Is that the idea? Because this has been around for a long time, I have to say. I mean, it's been a long time. We do know that, even in textbooks, we do learn that, Athens democracy, all of those, they're there. It's not like that they are not taught even. But for some reason, it doesn't work. It doesn't work partly because these are now somehow associated with this liberal democracy, or it is associated with the dominance of the US or the West. So how do we now separate that? I mean, just telling people that, you did this as well, I am not sure it's working. It's been around for a while.
Right next to you, yes.
Thank you. Thank you, professors. I think I just have a very, very brief question. I think, first of all, thanks for a very splendid explanation and discussion. I have a question about, like, how do you think about capitalism and the Cold War function in the making up of a global order, especially the Western-based capitalism? How does that different with the other example we've seen? It seems a very new breed, I think, about the Western modern capitalism. And does it really somehow is a very functional way to promote a multipolarity, or actually is it more destructive forces when we see how capitalism force on contributing to the future about the global order, no matter it's liberal or not? And if I may to add another one, it's about Cold War. Does Cold War actually have a more specific function in the term of history, no matter we take in a linear or not, to shape the order we see nowadays? And it's other example in the past comparable to the current order we are seeing. Thank you.
And then in the back row.
Okay, thank you very much. When I was listening to your discussion about liberalism and whether it is universal or not, it occurred to me that the framework of multiple modernities might be useful here. And the question is not how you call autonomy. So autonomy, whatever, it's imaginary, or the value, whatever you call it. It's not whether you call it freedom or something in Chinese. The question is that people in different cultures interpret and experience the autonomy in different ways. And then, you know, it's not where they come from, this idea come from. What is important, it is that it's again experienced in different ways. So freedom, so we may then talk about different liberalisms in a way, different modernities, and then would it, so the question is, would it be useful for your approach? And then, which I think is much more difficult question, to me at least, is, well, lots of contemporary scholarship shows that at least from 1600 onward, the very idea of autonomy, the very idea of freedom was based on affluence. So we are free when we are affluent. Hence the idea of economic growth. And economic growth and affluence are based nowadays, well, first on coal after Industrial Revolution, and then on another fossil fuel, which is oil. And now we have all this climate change, you know, the limits of the planetary reservoir for the CO2. Then the question is, if there is no anymore this connection between affluence and freedom, what it would mean, the climate change and the limits for the future of the world order.
So very excellent and very big questions for you. And despite the gigantic nature of the questions, I'm still going to ask you to give reasonably concise answers so that we can, we have a couple more questions to collect.
You know, affluence and freedom, the link, is a very contemporary formulation. I can tell you many examples where people, that goes back to Native American societies, not very affluent, but extremely free. And there was no capitalism at that time. So again, if you take a very broad view of history, a lot of things that you take for granted seem like, you know, have been wrong. So I have seen, I mean, you have certain Western artists and philosophers romanticizing poverty. I'm not talking about that. There were genuinely a lot of European settlers in North America ran away with the native Indians because they could not stand this, you know, the staying in this urban setting and within fences. And so you can actually have freedom without affluence. Only in the 20th century, economic growth leads to freedom. We have made that link, and we don't have to necessarily make that link. And I would also say that in terms of values and capitalism, I mean, okay, maybe I'm being too harsh on liberalism. For me, liberalism is universalism, and those values are universal. As long as you say that they were not invented only in the West. I'm very much all for it. You call it liberalism, multiplex liberalism, because they were not. And that's the whole idea of the book. In the foundational forms, perhaps imperfect forms, many of the ideas came from different societies, not from one society. Because as I said earlier, you have contradictions within each society. No civilization is purely this or purely that. Caricaturing civilization, this civilization is peaceful. The same Maurya dynasty produced King Ashoka renouncing war and the most aspiring bloodthirsty conqueror getting advice from Kautilya. So I have seen this dualism or whatever, eclecticism. I would prefer eclecticism in multiple civilizations. So I think that I don't really think Europe will become autocratic. Okay, I think there will be even in the United States we have forces of resistance coming up. Maybe tomorrow in the elections. So I think we are going through a stage where populist politicians have captured it, using certain economic conditions. Trump is basically a consequence, not a cause of what the liberal order failed to deliver to the middle class American or the Midwest Americans. But I think that things will change. And then my optimism actually is that don't take the present as permanent, and things will turn around. And I stand by this statement. You can remind me, unless there is a World War III, total climate collapse, invasion from Mars or somewhere else, I think generally we will manage. And again, Malcolm in Jurassic Park said, life finds a way, humanity finds a way.
Although Jurassic Park didn't have a very smooth progression. I mean, Yasmin's question about sort of for whom is this history most important? I mean, is it basically for your Western students to kind of remind them that not everything started in Greece, or is it also important for countries outside of the West to get buy-in?
Okay, there is a political discourse today, and there's a fantastic piece by Natasha Call from the University of Westminster. It's not published yet, but it will be published in a book that I'm doing with John Eikenberry about the various uses of the West non-West binary and for what kind of political purposes this binary is being used. And one issue is indeed that human rights issue. China has a whole discourse on that, where particularly the emphasis on individual human rights is so dominating the universal human rights discourse, and that has been an imposition of the West onto the rest of the world. In this context, it is, in my view, very important to show that this is factually wrong. Universal Declaration of Human Rights, I start with the founding documents. China, by the way, was part of the discussion. India was part of the discussion, and most of all, the Latin Americans were part of the discussion. If you want to look at any of the various internet, this is really my area, so I get passionate about it. If at any of the major international covenants, etc., that we have, it was always fought by the oppressed. Yeah, human rights were never delivered by those people who ruled. It was always a fight from below, and every single covenant of that. Talk about the anti-torture campaigns of the 1960s and 1970s that then led to the Convention Against Torture. Talk about the Convention in favor of indigenous peoples. These were indigenous peoples who fought this. Yeah. And therefore, ownership, in my view, is really important to remind people that these are their rights and that these are rights against the rulers in most cases. Yeah. So I do think that this historiography is important to hear. On the multiple modernities, that's a complicated story that we can do this endlessly. However, I would argue indeed individual freedom and autonomy is interpreted differently in different contexts around the world. And we have discussed this in scripts over the last 7 years when we had our so-called regional conferences, where we had authors from the various regions that show us, okay, what we call liberal is interpreted differently with different emphasis, for example, on the on the collective, different emphases on the individual, etc., and the soul. There are all these inbuilt tension in different thought, and there's nothing. If you mean that by multiple modernities, I'm all with you. And this is not about a uniformity of liberal thinking. I had a question to the multiplex because I have the same question to Amitav. The description, in my view, is correct as an analytical description. It probably also means that that regionalisms will becoming much more important. And for example, one thing, just little point of fact, against Trump's trade wars, what are we seeing? We see regional trade agreements popping up almost everywhere, including inter-regional trade agreements. So we're currently seeing a move from the WTO as a global trade order toward a more regionalized trade order that actually preserves all the principles on which the WTO was built in the first place, simply because the WTO is blocked, and not just because of Trump. So my question back to you would be, okay, multiplex, but how do you think about the global order and the relationships between these various regional orders? Yeah, as long as we have some sort of rule of law, some sort of international law, some multilateral institutions, because I mean, a lot of the stuff, climate change, you can't fight in the region. Forget it. Yeah, you need some global stuff on this. So is that compatible with your multiplex, or if you think it in terms of a reformed New World Order, let's get rid of the LIO. I mean, that's okay, if you don't like the term. But in terms of principles.
May I
Yeah,
quickly?
because it also to the first.
There are so many important points, and I'll be very fast. First of all, yes, regionalism, regional orders are very important building block. A multiplex is a decentered world. No single hegemony, or multipolar is a hegemony of 5 powers. Unipolar, bipolar is a handful of powers. So the regions are really the foundation. We did so much work with you guys. I mean, the Oxford Handbook on regionalism, comparative regionalism, and which is really selling so well. And I think the regionalism has always been. We go back to actually the 1945, the debate in San Francisco conference. So the same thing, that the Americans basically saying, we don't need regionalism, because regionalism means you're going to fight like Europeans did, regional alliances, universalism. And Latin Americans said, no, we have a heritage of regionalism, now why we can't have it? So there was a compromise. The regional organizations will have a role in the UN system, legally speaking. And that has become practical, because when the UN Security Council didn't function as expected, regionalism just came in. And NATO is, in that sense, became part of the regional building block. So I actually see these are building regionalism as building blocks rather than stumbling blocks of a global order. In terms of multiple modernities, I buy that. I actually mentioned that. And Peter Cardington has done work on this. But I don't think multiple modernities is cultural relativism. Multiple modernities means different societies, and Eisenstadt's work. I mean, I have actually written a paper on multiple modernism and liberal order, actually. And I think it's a great idea to acknowledge that different societies have built similar ideas, but maybe in slight variations. But that doesn't justify that we are culturally different, therefore we have no sense of universal human rights. So where it will be useful is if we find that different modernities that are out there, there is no singular way of rising, the singular way of achieving security, prosperity. But there will also be space for negotiated compromise, that there will be differences, but you find there'll always be some common ground. If you if we say cultural relativism, that China China is a Confucian society, doesn't believe in human rights. That's not true, but empirically, by the way. So you have to find where that's where the tasks of diplomats and all. By the way, Thomas, the work about human rights, there was nationalist China during Taiwan today at the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The reason why we have all human beings are created equal and not all men are created equal, as the French has proposed and Mrs. Roosevelt had accepted, is because of an Indian delegate called Hansa Mehta. So the global South, you are absolutely right. The oppressed, basically, Winston Churchill, I have a chart in this, I didn't show you. We have studied, me and a research assistant, 22 volumes of San Francisco Conference, do a content analysis. Colonialism 10 times. Racism, only no anti-racial discrimination, but bracketed with all other kinds of discrimination. There's no racial equality norm in the UN Charter. Why? Because Winston Churchill said, we don't want to discuss colonialism, otherwise we are going to walk out. Britain had a large empire at that time. And racialism was not an issue. I mean, there was, of course, the main human rights concern that period was the Holocaust. And the colonialism as a form of racism wasn't there. So who brought this in? It is later on global South countries. The covenants are mainly done through the agency of the global South because the US and Britain did not want to talk about colonialism. So we have actually seen that most of them came in the 60s, 70s, and 80s through covenant supplements that were not in the UN Charter. UN Charter is big on sovereign equality, makes no mentions of racial equality. And without having that kind of talks about non-intervention. Without mentioning something in the preamble, it will deny its certain legitimacy. And I think that's why I don't buy cultural relativism that only the Western countries or certain types of countries believe in human rights, the others don't. That doesn't mean they don't abuse it. I mean, the global...
As does everyone.
But we see before our eyes is being abused in the greatest nation in the world.
We had two more questions. Let's see. I don't know. We'll take these two and then see if there's time. If not, there's a reception afterward, and both speakers will be at the reception, so you can catch them. Try to make the questions that are not.
Thank you very much for this wonderful presentation. I really learned a lot. And my question, which is, if America do not prepare enough or do not willing go into multiple polarization world, what should we do? We can't keep fighting the trade war forever and ever, right? 2018, when I was American college student, I was studying abroad in Italy. A studying abroad program name is called Food and Culture. Such peaceful program, nothing related with the politics. However, one day, breaking news, suddenly trade war break up between China and America. I can feel like everyone, American student, they suddenly so anxious. They keep asking me about a lot of questions. And also when I was working at the Middle Eastern area in the last 2 years, I also met up a lot of American friends. They also feel like they don't know what they should to do in the future. I was so confused about that because I remember American used to be very confident. American President Reagan, he used to be said, we have a power to let a whole world go over again. Yeah, I like that sentence, but right now I don't feel that. Also, my second short question, which is, if America willing go into the multipolarization world, does Europe have enough courage to be independent? Yeah, that's my two questions. Thank you very much.
And behind you?
Hello, thank you. I'm Barnaby Dyer, a fellow here in King's College London. My question, I welcome the sort of real corrective of your work and also the analytical usefulness of multiplex as a way of trying to analyze where we're going. But I wanted to sort of challenge the optimism again and come back to perhaps this debate about agency versus structure and what the possibilities are structurally in the more multiplex world for solving some of the collective action problems. We mentioned climate change. These deals were hard enough to go by 10 years ago. They seem much harder to me to try and enforce now, both through soft power and through sort of harder power means. And I think we've seen in some of the more recent crises, again, these sort of challenges of collective action. I think about the current genocide happening in Sudan, and the response of it today, as opposed to when this happened last time in Darfur, and the global attention that it received previously compared to now, or in the Palestine context, the sort of lack of solidarity from the global south, often rhetorically previously much stronger, also some action by countries like India previously much stronger, today really lacking. And it seems to me, yes, we're moving to a more regional world, but are there sort of real structural constraints around what that entails for trying to solve actual global problems rather than just regional ones? Thank you.
So I am going to end with those two questions and the final comment. So everyone else who didn't get to ask their questions, please be encouraged to ask your questions at the reception. I'm going to start with you, Thomas, and have you, yes, about sort of avoiding conflict and the lack of American confidence and what the Europeans will do. And then, Amitav, I'll have you go second.
My reaction to that is on the US, and I have to say that we have our second home is in the US. So I'm spending quite some time there. It has a lot to do with the domestic situation in the US. The US is deeply divided and polarized. Yeah, up to the point where if you're a voter for Trump, you now try to locate mostly in rural areas. If you're a voter for Democrat, you go to the cities. Yeah, so your whole life is affected by that polarization, and that might feed into this perception that you found that Americans are no longer that confident about themselves. But I think it has much more to do with the internal situation in the US. I don't know how Rachel sees this.
I mean, I would agree, and also, I mean, there is relative decline, right? So there's reason to be slightly less confident than the U.S. was in the 50s. I mean, relative decline and lots of foreign policy failures.
Right. On Europe, I didn't mean to say that we should simply sever all the ties to the United States. First of all, that is impossible. And secondly, there's still a lot of societal contacts. I think what I meant to say is, and hopefully, if please don't misunderstand me on that point. What I meant to say is, particularly in the security and defense area, that Europe needs to be on its own feet. Okay, that is primarily a question of conventional defense, but we also have to think about nuclear deterrence in that context. Yeah, a complete independence, again, in your multiplex world, that is an illusion anyway. Yeah, we can make the same argument with China, by the way, so or with India or whatever. That's, I mean, we're no longer in a world where this complete independence is possible, and that is why I think this is what Amitav meant to say when he was criticizing the concept of multipolarity. Behind that is still the idea that we are in this world of billiard balls bumping into each other. Yeah, and then you have some great powers and they bump into each other a bit more than the small powers, and the small powers have to see whether what they do. If we have all these other interlinkages, etc., we're in a way more complex world. Yeah, and what he means then is they're also leaders in different areas. Yeah, it can. So there is no longer any kind of hegemonic power, and even thinking about the world as a giant struggle between the U.S. and China overlooks pretty much the rest of the world, and how it is relevant. I mean, so we should be really careful in the way we describe or we analyze what we're seeing, because the world has changed a lot in the meantime.
And Amitav, what about multiplex answers to climate change and
Yeah.
Sudan, etc.?
Look, in my formulation of multiplex, I argue that no single country or actor can solve all the problems. And leadership there's another term called G+. The United States remains the dominant military power, and there's no way China will catch up anytime soon, global power projection. China increasingly is the number one actor when it comes to infrastructure development, economic development, and the United States cannot match that or doesn't want to match it. The European Union have always given credit. It's, we can call it regulatory superpower or climate change action. I mean, they're most of the norms, even going back to the EU emission standards, we have been following that. So the future multiplex world, no single country leads in every issue area. Leadership is based on issue-specific domains. But when you come to climate change and global governance, it cannot be just states. I mean, Thomas made the point that you have to act at the global level, but you also have to act at the regional level. You also have to have the local level. And some of my own research on global governance, I teach a course also, we find that some of the most effective forms of climate action happens at the municipal level. And when Trump withdraws from Paris Peace Agreement, Paris Climate Agreement, California said, we are not going to do it. You have to force us to withdraw, but we're going to keep to the standards. And when you have public-private corporations, but NGOs partnering to maintain, let's say arrest deforestation, and they may not be able to solve everything, but at least when it comes to things like deforestation, which is a source of air pollution, they can do that. So I think a lot of action can actually happen either at the local level, regional level, municipal level, or all of the above. This is where that's what multiplex is about. Multiplex, and it's a G+. It's not G1, G2, G20, but government plus actors. And I strongly believe that when it comes to human rights, when it comes to climate change, even pandemic, I did a study of the slums of Mumbai called Dharavi. They actually had minimal COVID deaths. Why? Because the entire community came together with local health authorities, and they did a on-the-spot sanitization and before even the vaccine came in. And it was all done at that level. The central government didn't have the capacity and doing anything. So they kind of created an island of infection-free zone. And you cannot solve the global problems like that, but if you set examples like this, and there's a whole bunch of examples I can give you on climate change, on fighting pandemics, protecting people in certain areas. It may not work in finance, okay, but it certainly works in economic development. You could actually bring them these actors, and that's why I don't like multipolar. I mean, at a certain level, distribution of power matters. I'm not saying it doesn't, but it's not. World order is much more than distribution of material power, and this book basically therefore conceptualizes this multiplex, and I think it's a kind of a post-hegemonic world. Doesn't mean everybody is becoming equal. There will be asymmetries, but at the same time, we are not going to see. I mean, there's one thing I agree with John Mearsheimer, by the way, that global hegemony is extremely rare. There has never been actually a global world order. This is the point of Kissinger as well. The Han and the Tang and the Roman Empire were not global actors. Most world orders are regional. And maybe that's what I'm talking about.
So thank you. Thank you very much. I have this, which there were some copies of it, but I kept one just in case all the copies got sold, so you can take a picture of it. I do very much recommend reading the book. It's very readable. It is really not written for an academic audience, and it's quite a pleasure to read and combines a lot of history with some global order. And we have a 25% off code, so the paper will be out there. You can take a picture of it. And please join us for a reception. But first, please thank very much our partners from Scripps and Thomas Risse for joining us. And most importantly, also Amitav Acharya for coming to Berlin and talking about multiplex and optimistic future world order.